first rodeo on. All right, so thank you. I will introduce Sam again. So we have Sam from Hudu, because if you Hudu, we do too. We have integration with Hudu, and Sam's coming to talk to us about some best practices that he sees from the lens of Who-doers, who do it, who does it. I don't know how do you verbalize it, but Sam, I'll pass it over to you.
That's definitely a lot more fun than just Hudu users. So maybe we have to look at some rebranding.
Yes. I mean, you're looking at a screen full of happy life cyclers, so they need to be happy Who-doers or something.
Terrible. I might end up stealing a couple names. I'm just warning you now if I find anything.
You're welcome.
I'll be sure to credit you on our page. So I, for those of you who don't know, I'm the educational officer of Hudu. So when it comes to teaching everything and content that comes from Hudu, that's a big part that I play with the company. And so actually leading into a topic about documentation, I'm going to show you some things within Hudu. These are completely applicable across the board. If you're using other programs, I'm not going to try to force you or trick you into Hudu, but at the very least, you could at least learn and apply this to wherever it works best for you. I'm going to show.
I would love to see what it would look like for you to trick one of these folks into like, oh, I didn't realize I accidentally integrated with a whole new platform.
Oh no, you just found the best documentation platform ever. I guess you're stuck with us now.
With the CWRMM challenges we're having, I might be convinced.
Give me 5. I got this. I'm ready for it. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. So I'm going to skip the whole explanation of Hudu. Long story short, really what we do is we create a platform for you to document, for you to host the information that you need, whether it's articles, important info. But in this case, I'm going to focus on asset tracking. So the devices that you have to keep in mind, the people, the clients, whether this can be very malleable, but I'm going to focus on a quick little topic and talk about asset management. So I'm clicking into one of our clients right now, and all this information here is going to be within our Tesco client. And throwing myself under the bus immediately, this is our demo program. And right off the bat, this already has practices that are not favorable by any means. And yet this is a page that we show, but it's a great opportunity to talk about what does work really well. And we can talk about what you shouldn't be doing. Now, in this case, we have an integration attached. So we have this main info, we have a card, primary info, title, the things that we might want to know about this individual. But above it, there was more that I needed to add. So I have a primary device, a computer, but below it, you'll immediately see I just have date and licensing. Now, warranties are going to be something really important to track for individuals, whether it's certain applications they use, devices, but this obviously isn't labeled well. It's past expiration. We're staring at it, and as a new technician, as a new user coming in, I have no idea what this means or what the context of this is. And one of the biggest things that I want to hammer in terms of documentation is label for someone who doesn't know what they're coming into. We get to build information all the time. I'm sure many of us are writing down notes, and we can always go, yeah, I'll remember this down the line. But when it comes to documentation, you shouldn't have to remember it. This should be something that you get to host. So when someone else looks into this, they get the context of what they're looking at. They get the context of what they're looking into. And from brand new eyes, I'm sure none of you know what this licensing is. And I don't know what this licensing is. And that's the biggest issue right off the bat, is just labeling. And we go off to the side though, but we can talk about the things that are really important.
Can I pause for just a second? Sorry, I'm going to totally interrupt your flow. So I once read something about how really intelligent people outsource they expand the capacity of their own brain by outsourcing it in places. So post-it notes like, I'm never going to remember something, I'm just going to always ask this guy who always knows it. Like, all of my beekeeping information is right with Sam, right? I don't bother keeping it access. So the labeling piece, I think, if you have the ability to keep all of it in your own head, that's fine, but you actually can expand your own capacity with, again, smart labels and things. So it takes off the brain load, the lifting when you're on the page.
There's a whole rabbit hole you can go down of second brain. Like it's an entire concept. Don't Google that if you don't want to lose your weekend to it.
No, I mean, but yeah, building right off of that, we keep so many things in our head and we keep track of everything. But at the end of the day too, you are also responsible for another team. I mean, how many times have any of you gone on vacation, you've stepped away from your computer, and all of a sudden the whole workflow stops because the information that you have within your head can't be accessed right now because you happen to step away for a minute. and it derails. It might be really, really small. Little things can cause big issues, or maybe it's not big at all, but you need autonomy within your team. And that's where really these documentation tools take that away from you. Take the opportunity where if you do step away and you document things well, you're not required to, give up that vacation time. If you're having to relay questions constantly because you have all the answers, this is an opportunity for you to write that down. And beyond just writing it down, we also get to use polymorphic documentation. In this case, when you create a tool, when you create something that is applicable beyond it, we don't have to repeat that at all. And that's where the relationship and related items. Now, if you're familiar with IT Glue, they have a very similar platform like this. So any of those users, don't worry, I won't get mad at you, but we can at least talk about how to use those types of items really well. If you create a password, you might have an article talking about Office 365 and you need a password. It makes sense to have that within the document, maybe not securely, but if you do want to have it in there, everything is one click away. And that's what's really important within tech. But we go beyond that and we say, okay, well, now if I need that password for another person, for another program, I'm now digging through articles. I'm now digging through everything. Whereas documentation tools are meant to relieve that stress and relieve the issues that you might face. And in this case, we get to pull it aside and say, okay, we have our passwords right here. And if I click into this, it's not embedded into this person. It's actually a unique entity that we get to create connections with. We get to backtrack, connect with other things, and we get to identify them in a way that when you're documenting, when you're tracking information, there's not only breadcrumbs, but also context, things that you're connecting with. And so I'm trying not to be too broad and give you exact examples. And I think one of the best ones for them is connecting those passwords in a way that can relate to multiple people, having proper labeling that are specific. And all of this gets, bogged down by the security standards that we have to do. But really the most important thing to focus on is if you can write it, let's write it down. And at what point do you have to say, this is too much, this is too little, and get another perspective is really the other thing. Consider who's looking at this documentation and what they might need. If you're an MSP, you're looking at how to service these clients, how to provide this information. But if you're an internal team and, for whatever reason, Scott has lost his password for the 7th time this week, that's okay. We can just bring that password somewhere else. And now we have it connected. We don't have to have a note saying he always forgets his password. But we can do is attach their accounts, their passwords, their devices all in one area. And now Scott's able to get the things that he needs. He can get back to work because let's face it, if he's forgetting it, there's probably way more important things on his plate. He probably has more things to focus on. And you also have important things to focus on. And documentation is supposed to make that easy. It's supposed to make it accessible. Now, I could keep going, but I'm also realized that this can turn into a ramble any minute when we talk about documentation. So I am going to look at the chat right now. I guess one of the biggest questions I want to know is, what are the issues that you all are facing with? What are the biggest stresses when it comes to the information that you need on your day-to-day, even if it's a small thing?
Fred wants that sidebar on the left.
Oh, you mean this one right here?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So I have curiosity. Are you a Hudu user or are you interested in Hudu? Do you just like
Yes,
the
no, I
organization?
have it. And I've done some customizations, but I can't find that sidebar thing.
Oh, well, I guess starting off from the beginning, just clicking into a client, this should be here, but we also have this collapse button. So in case this is collapsed, that might be an immediate thing. However, if this is something that you're actually facing issues with, 100% ping me. And maybe that's something that we have to talk about because, it's on one thing we can talk about best practices, but if you can't use the tools, I think it's time to talk about that too.
So that I've got some issues around documentation, right? It's like getting people to do it is one of the problems. And one of the ways we've battled that is by not telling our engineers they don't have to make it perfect, get it 60% of the way there. And then the next person that gets it adds another 20%, as they're using it. And then, so basically it's kind of like don't feel like it needs to be perfect, get something in there, period, that starts getting used. And then as more people use it, you perfect it over time. A good example of that is making my engineers feel like they don't need to take screenshots for the first revision, right? First revision, do we need to really spend time doing a bunch of screenshots? No, let's just get it in there. The other thing is, with GTP and Google, I mean, a lot of the times we're finding articles already made online, and then we're copy pasting those into our database and then referencing the original link so we can, get an updated version down the road if it ever gets outdated. But the documentation itself, I heard it broken down the best in kind of 3 different parts. There's the change management database information. That's the information that you wish you had documented, but it changes so often that the minute you document it, it becomes stale. So no one ever really bothers to document it. And that's where LionGuard comes in and saves the day, right? Then you've got your KB articles and your SOPs, right? And the SOPs are like procedures on how to do things, a lot of times internal operational type stuff, or maybe even a big project template or whatever. Whereas the KB articles are kind of those quick knowledge base, fix this problem, right? Do you see anything else like documentation wise outside of those 3 components that you see people kind of embracing, or is that a good way to sum it up?
I mean, honestly, I would say right off the bat, it's great to sum it up in terms of what exactly you're using. The thing that I would add on to it is what I talked about before of that context and those relationships, because the second you have your documentation siloed, you're slowing down a lot of the processes and the things that you're trying to do. And of course, that's easier said than done. There's so many ways to store things, and it's so hard to, one, stay organized, not have crossover, but also quick links and relationships. And that's one of those things that we really try to push with Hudu is building relationships. And that's why we talk about the polymorphic documentation. It's building your documentation as a jigsaw puzzle, not as a silo. These pieces all have to work together. And the best way that you find how they link one in one is going to be the best way of creating that communication. And of course, it's really hard to first implement that, because there's no denying when you first start off with that kind of form, you're giving up efficiency. You are taking time to really sit down and organize it. But once you build the example of how to best do it, I mean, if we're shooting for 60%, that's totally reasonable. If you're spending most of your day writing down rather than actually working, it defeats the whole purpose of documentation in the first point. But what we can do is establish, okay, what do we need, and embed that for certain fields to be required for certain things. And on top of that, have references, best examples attached. So when you are developing this documentation, there's always a reference of what is the minimum. And something that we don't talk about enough is, do you have a document that tells your team how to document? What is the internal documentation guide? Do we have something in there that says, when you're writing something down, this is the bare minimum that we need? And it's okay for the bare minimum to take a minute, because it's going to save you 5 down the road. And so one thing that's going to be unique to everyone is going to be, how much time can we give up for the setup? But it's not, can we give up time? It's going to be a necessity to start you off in the best way possible.
I love that you brought that up, because that's another challenge that we have with documentation. Once you get it all in there, okay, great, it's searchable. But then the next level of magic comes in with relating everything together, right? So that items are related. Does Hudu have any plans to help us automate that, right? Because it is kind of a manual process. I mean, you'd think you could look through the records and be like, hey, this host name matches that host name. Maybe these records relate to each other. Or this email address matches this email address. Maybe we should auto-relate these, right? What are your thoughts around that? Because I feel like the relation of items does take quite a time to do manually, right?
Yeah, there's no denying that it does take a minute to kind of start that off, especially if you're doing it a lot. When it comes to our plans for that, careful, if you ask too many questions, I'm too honest, I might end up leaking development plans when I shouldn't. But especially because I get too excited talking about it. I will say, though, right at the moment, not quite. Just full, right off the board. I'm not going to deliver any promises I can't right now, of course.
Yeah.
But what we are looking at is reviving how we approach relationships, because there is a difference between necessity and this is taking too long, because you need relationships. But if it's taking so long to create these relationships, it almost works against you. And that's not That's not the purpose. That's not okay with documentation. So I will say
Reminds me of the book, The Checklist Manifesto, which is like, there's too much, there's not enough, there's the Goldilocks effect, the exact right amount.
yeah, and that's always going to be such a weird form to start off with, because it always starts off with not enough, and then you go back to revise your documentation, and then you have too much, and then you realize that you just wasted all this time finding that middle line. But I think the best way right off the bat is, rather than thinking that time wasted as wasted, you did find a solution and you wouldn't have found it. But circling back to the relationships, we do want to adjust how they work, make them a lot more easier, make them a lot more simple. The biggest difficulty with the name association is, what line do we create an association with, how close those lettering is, the wording is, because if you have server in your name and you create a relationship, you're going to get 500 servers pop up. So that's one of the things that we're trying to focus on is, do you do a number scheme or whatever else with that kind of automated relationship? But Brian, I hope that answers your question at least. I hope I didn't go off too much on a tangent.
No, but you made me realize like something I haven't really dug into my team with, right? I've got them documenting all this stuff, but they aren't really front of mind. Hey, as we're documenting, maybe we should also be relating, right? And so it's definitely a discussion I want to have with them.
Oh yeah, and there's a myriad of ways to do it, and I'm more than happy to share the gold standard recommendation. But the hard thing is, we all handle our workflow so differently. So I'm always happy to start off with a baseline, but the toughest reality of documentation is that what works for me doesn't work for you. The time management, the association. But one thing that Hudu does really want to sell is that every technician, every individual should be able to be the hero of solving that solution that's in front of them. And they can only do that if everyone puts in the work of creating the context and the documentation that they need. I am.
One of the things that we've found when doing it that may help with adoption is when somebody calls like the service desk and asks, hey, what's this? Instead of just giving them the password or saying what the password is, you say, hey, have you checked Hudu? Have you checked, whatever system you have for documentation? Because, that it helps make that be that first, like, where do I go first? Instead of going to, Sam or Brian for my first call, you're going to go, oh, I'm going to go here. So,
and also a quick note, we do have a free portal so people can access their own portals and they don't have to pay for that. Just a quick little note. Sorry for the plug-in in the middle of that.
No, that's great.
That is a really good point though, Andrew. It's just where to start, especially for creating the tools for clients to be able to solve those problems themselves. And also, I mean, it's a tough conversation to have because you never know how to build the best plan for everyone within a company. There are going to be those people who excel really well, can keep everything in mind and memorize every bit of documentation. And then there are going to be those who work really well in some areas and just need those references constantly and just need to build off of that. I know I'm someone, admittedly, who's particularly like that. If I see one word that reminds me, I have the rest of it. But if I don't have that little reminder, I'm just admittedly just a little, stuck in the water, can't really do a whole lot on my own. It's just that like one little reference that gets me going.
I like to tell a story about what happened at my MSP. This was probably 2013 or so, maybe 2014. It all runs together. But IT glue was a thing by then. So whatever that time frame means, we owned IT glue for a year. We weren't good at using it. We had the edict from on high. Alex said, "Thou shalt all use IT glue." And of course, my techs took me just as serious as your techs take you. And it wasn't well documented. For a myriad of a couple reasons, we lost 3 of our 5 technical people in a period of about 90 days. And with it, a crap ton of institutional knowledge. But what happened was the 2 technical people that remained became immediate fans of documentation. They were the most raving fans you could possibly ever have, because they knew that as new people came in, anybody who learned something, it had to go in there because they never wanted to experience that again. Hopefully you never have to experience that, but a story like that might help you explain to your engineers why it's important. Because if the guy sitting next to you isn't doing documentation, but he leaves, he takes with him everything that he knows. And there's two parts to that. Like, number one, we're working against that. The other part is you're not promotable from being a standard technician, just that guy, into the next job role until somebody else can do everything you can do. So you're not promotable until you're replaceable. That's kind of the methodology that goes along with that. That's my soapbox moment on documentation.
No, I mean, I come from the other end. I was a analyst consultant for a company for a little bit, and we'd get these companies, and that was really what we did. They had said, hey, our database isn't really working, or it's old and outdated and it's slow and it's not usable anymore. So we go, yeah, totally. Let's take a look. And then, we get a software database from the 90s and it's 2020 and they have no documentation. They have no background. And so, we're here to help, we're here to fix. But without that information, without what we're pulling from, we really had nowhere to go from. And it's either we now have to build it from scratch, which costs the company way more money. If we had access to pull from, if we knew how to extract their data and pull everything from it. I mean, I don't know if any of you have worked with Control M before, but I had to learn PowerShell over the course of a weekend. And unfortunately, that's filling time. I then had to teach myself a whole language and database system on top of PowerShell to get that working. Whereas a couple little notes, a couple little examples, how this information is pulled, how they use it, really could have saved this company tens of thousands of dollars. And it's just that little form of documentation, even if it's, what we talked about with what Brian mentioned before, getting that 60%, I wouldn't take that credit away of 60%. You're still getting the vital information. And it's time to talk about, rather than rephrasing it as 60%, it's done. If you have everything that you need, you're allowed to say that this is where we need it, but we're allowed to want more. And not even having that baseline or the start, it's killer, especially from a support side. I might be the chief educational officer of Hudu, but I sit on support tickets to make sure I know what's going on. And it's a great way of connecting and making sure I know what the issues are. But sometimes we have issues where people can't even describe the issue, or we have people talk about something going wrong, but there was no record keeping. There's no anything that follows it. And it's really difficult because, of course, we want to help. But if we have no context and no information, without the most basic form of recording, everyone's really limited on finding a solution together. And now I'll get off my soapbox if anyone wants to take over.
Everyone got soapboxes for the holidays. I
want to ask a question. I want to pick on Hudu for a minute.
Please, let's do it.
And this is education, right? What are the best practices? Because when we work with partners, we find their data where they have an RMM agent installed is usually spotless. It's good, right? The agent picks up all the data, passes it to the PSA, passes it to the documentation system. We pull the data in, it's clean, it's healthy, it's good. What are some best practices, automations, shortcuts? What can MSPs do to help with the rest of that, the asset and inventory documentation, firewall switches, access points, all the other ancillary things that for us, they come in and we want to pull them out and put them on a budget, but they're usually the things that are missing.
Yeah,
what are the best practices that you see folks doing that are really successful?
Really the biggest thing is just, first of all, it's also knowing which integrations work really well, and also realizing the limitations that Hudu can do versus what an individual tech can do. And so we had LionGuard mentioned earlier, which is a great example of you can't be updating that information constantly. So having a good start of first establishing just the scope. Oh, sorry, what was that?
Nothing.
Oh, sorry, I thought I heard something. So it's going to be just starting ground zero. What solution are we solving? And then also just a step before that, why are we solving this solution? And then going into the actual best practices of building your asset layouts specific, making them really rigid, customizing them as best as possible, and enforcing a lot of fields. And a great way of identifying what you do and don't need is going to be that kind of backwalk of we realize that we're missing this field a lot and we're forcing as necessary. This is no longer something we need, backtrack. But a way of forcing recording, and especially information, if you do have firewalls or information, something the admin really have to do is enforce that these fields are being filled out. So when you're doing your documentation, you can't skip a line. It won't let you save in the first place. But then we get to the next form of, okay, I can't fill this form out because this information is unavailable. And then you get to talk about the review. And so it's going to be kind of a circular process of, first, we need to record everything. But now we get to identify what are the things that we actually don't have as much as we need. And then we can identify it from there. In that case, that might be a little more broad. Oh, sorry, what was that?
So you're touching on a topic that's interesting, because life cycle goes through the same process, right? You're not ready to go out of the gate. You got to, prune the data, get it accurate. And they have a data quality section that kind of shows you where you're at on the asset side, right? And I know you guys have that too in here, right? Shows you kind of like what assets have been filled out, which ones have and haven't. The interesting thing, though, you touched on the fact that, yeah, I want a field required. This needs to be filled out, but we don't have the info yet. But we still need to make the record. The minute we make the record and go to your data quality report, it shows a green check mark, right? Like, hey, this record's been filled out, even though that one field is still empty. So I'd love to see Hudu get a little more granular with their data quality, where you can define individual fields on whether or not they're filled out to determine data quality metrics versus just the record itself, right? Because that's what's been kind of hard, is we don't make those fields required because we got to get the other data in there at least. And then we're going through the first time, getting it all in, and then we want to go back and see, okay, what's left to do? And you're almost having to go through each individual record to see what might be missing in that field, or make sure that field shows up like on a column, right? So you can see that it's empty in each client. So just a suggestion there that would help us more granularly understand data that's missing in the documentation system, and maybe even Lifecycle can take that back too, because I know your customer success module doesn't really have a data quality, helping us understand what it's missing to be more accurate. So that'd be awesome too, for Lifecycle.
No, I mean, you make a good point. It's hard to see where your documentation is failing, where in this case, we do have a lot more of a broad rating system within Hudu to rate your documentation system. And we do a score, but I guess, and a fair point, it does need to be more specific so you know what's going on. And back to talking to Alex about those best practices and really getting started within Hudu and what you need to record. One thing that's going to be really important for the admin, I think I'm still sharing. You guys have just been staring at a blank Hudu screen this whole time. I'm sorry about that. But one thing that's going to be really important is understanding your asset layouts and going to be saying exactly what we're building from. And so I'm going to pull up an existing example. So we have our application example. We have templates built within Hudu, and you get to customize these further. But going back to those fields that are required, what you really need to specify, customize within Hudu. And I can't state this enough. When we give you these tools, these aren't rigid rules that you have to follow. These aren't things that you're stuck in a box and have to only work within it. Really understanding what you need and what you need to customize to make it work. We give you as many tools as possible to customize, whether it is those SOPs, you have processes built into Hudu, and we have ways of making it work for you. But when you're really in your instance and you're really building out, one thing that you have to consider is think outside of the box with what Hudu starts you off with, because we start you at a baseline and recommendations. But the biggest value that you're going to get out of Hudu is trying to break it, trying to break exactly what you need, trying to make it to adjust to your workflow and your styles. Something that we notice a lot is we start with recommendations and how features work. And there tends to be a disconnect of, oh, I can only do it this way now. And it's going to be something that tends to hold back a little bit, especially with relationships or even flagging. We have a flag management tool where you can customize these flags and create documentation, but it's hard to break from the rules that we set because it's not often that you really get to have these tools work for you are super malleable and make them adjust. But within Hudu, you are able to fully customize, rework how these things work for you, and really getting into Hudu and coming in with we can do more, and we can start you off with the baseline, but customize, break it. What doesn't work? What does work? And what do you need? Don't think about what you can do within the scope of the software. Think about how you can force the software to work for your scope and go beyond just what you might initially think of the limitations, and try to go beyond just that.
Fred asked a question in chat about pulling people from Autotask.
Oh yeah, actually, I'll do a quick little integration show off. So Autotask will pull over whatever you want it to bring over for the integration. So I'm going to go into my edit settings so we can actually filter this further. So we get to identify exactly what you want, and they're going to be filtered within your asset layouts of Hudu. So in our case, we call our clients people in Hudu or whatever else. We get to determine what we're importing, so we can skip the items as well. And then right at the top, it just says contacts will be, place it within an asset layout within Hudu. And then we get to determine, so when you're integrating with Hudu or pulling that information in, you're not getting just a lump of data. You're actually getting everything and putting that into the asset layouts, the things that you already have built out, these guidelines and categories. So you don't have to organize that. Oh, in that case, we might actually have to get you updated then. This is, I should also disclose, our demo version is always one version ahead. So this is typically a beta, but currently if your version is not 0.19 within Hudu, then we should probably get you updated, unless you're self-hosted. In which case, we do have the documentation to update yourself.
Yeah, we're not self-hosted, but I am curious, how does your update cycle work if we're not updated yet? Is that something we have to manually request?
Yeah, at the moment we do. We actually have a big release coming out to manage that yourself. But
okay.
Yes, at the moment, reach out to us and we can get you updated.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then if you are curious, we do have a blog post that captures everything with the update. So if you want to see what new features, we do have everything logged so you can see all of that. Man, this 10-minute conversation window you gave me, Marty, has turned into about 30. So I apologize and thank you all for letting me speak as much as I have.
Well, let's be clear. No, you're fine. Well beyond 10 minutes for sure. We go until 4. So as long as folks have questions, have at it.
No, yeah, and also please reach out to us with questions too. I am someone who loves having a conversation with people, especially potential clients. You don't have to even use our software. And if you straight up say, I don't like it, but I still want to talk to you, that's fine. I mean, Hudu's become where it is because of the people that recommend features, because of the feedback that we get. We build our features based off of what gets upvoted on our feedback site. And if we can't take criticism, then we're just going to be stagnant.
We're very much alike that way.
Yeah, when Sam and I were planning for our webinar before, we were like, okay, here are lots of things Lifecycle Insights and Hudu have in common.
So Sam, interesting about the update. I'm glad I learned that today. Thank you, Lifecycle, for helping me learn something new about Hudu. I'm curious because we do integrate LionGuard, but it brings them in all as cards, right? Where they're not really searchable fields. Is that, and I remember hearing something was on the roadmap to fix that. Is that part of these new versions or is that not out yet?
Yeah, so that's going to be our comprehensive search. So that will find anything and everything, even within LionGuard. So that will be there. We are looking to expand the search as well. No date on that yet. But yes, comprehensive search does work. I was able to confirm it. If for whatever reason there are still issues with that, absolutely ping me or reach out to support and we'll fix that.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you going to demo what information you're bringing over to Lifecycle from Hudu?
So I will answer that one. We are using Hudu as a primary integration. So it is companies, contacts, assets that we grab directly from there. The advantage of Hudu as a primary integration is that it has the framework for Ninja data and Atera data, et cetera, that we can grab over because we don't have primary integrations with Ninja or Atera. So it's if you have ConnectWise, for example, we're still aiming for your source of truth. So if you had all of your assets, companies, and contacts in ConnectWise, then we don't have any secondary integration with Hudu yet, where we would get additional information. So it's just the primary integrator, as a lot of folks were leaving other documentation platforms and they were needing a Hudu integration to be able to continue their they felt like we were holding them hostage. We needed Hudu so they could leave their other documentation platform. Yeah.
I think a low hanging fruit one would be able to link to contracts in Hudu, right? Because ideally, what's that?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, because like as a single source of truth to store all contracts, I'd like to be documentation rather than storing in lifecycle, but then be able to link to contracts in documentation from lifecycle, right?
So I know the priority was primary integration first, and then be able to add all of our other primaries as secondaries, to have what other information we would pull. So I know that that's on the board, although I don't know that I specifically remember contracts from Hudu. I think looking at using Hudu as the jumping off point to grab some Ninja data and like I said, Atera data have helped some folks, but I'll go check and look at the contract piece.
I believe I believe you're talking about the agreements, right? That pull over the sites of contract forms. Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, of course I can't answer that, but I can, I guess, kind of pull off exactly what kind of example you're looking for while I still have it up. Are you talking about these active agreements right here?
Yes. Yeah. Like you're basically the agreement section. Yeah, you got it. Another thing that we're challenged with too, that we've been bouncing back and forth, figuring out where we're going to track this, and we're tracking it in like several different places, unfortunately, are key contacts for a client, right? And we've got, we probably track about 8 different key contacts for a given client, right? There's, I don't have to list them out, but the latest one we added was insurance contact, right? Who handles cybersecurity insurance. And so I know that's a part of your customer success module where it's like, hey, have you captured all key contacts? It'd be nice to set some metrics around that, or have some identification other than just a sliding thing that we say, yes, we've done it, right? Let's confirm with some data that yes, these contacts have been assigned, right? So just maybe a feature request on the customer success side. And where I see that being valuable too, is making sure that that data can be seen in other places. If we're defining that in lifecycle, because that's where it makes sense to do it, let's make sure we can get that information over to documentation and even the PSA somehow.
We probably should be documenting it in the PSA or in Hudu with a contact type.
Yep.
If your PSA supports it.
We're actually doing it in the PSA with UDFs, unfortunately.
And there's the problem. Some of the PSAs don't let us capture those UDFs. Yeah.
And then they Autotask came out with contact groups, but guess what? You can't filter by those. You can't search. I can't list. They're ridiculous. They're not even usable. And so that's why I'm thinking, well, if we're determining that we've captured all the key contacts in the life cycle, then how is lifecycle going to know that for a fact? I don't want it to have to look at the PSA to tell me that. I want to define it in lifecycle. I want to be able to create contact types in lifecycle and have them required to be assigned to a contact per company, and then show up in the data quality showing me that, hey, you don't have all your key contacts assigned yet. And now we're going to automatically measure this metric for you. You're not going to define it manually, because
that makes a problem though. And think of it from the perspective of how we approach everything else, which is your data has to be where everyone in your organization can get access to it, right? Every one of your engineers may not be in Lifecycle Insights, but every one of your engineers needs to know who the data breach point of contact is at a customer. So we don't want to orphan data in our tool. What we really need is to figure out how to get it out of those other tools.
But these other tools aren't CRMs. They suck at CRM. We looked at GlassHive and we were going to do it in GlassHive because that's our CRM. But then we realized, oh, not everyone's in the CRM.
But you don't have to have a CRM to say, of my supported users, these are the ones that matter. There's got to be a better way to do that.
Yeah, the
'Cause
only
the CRM
thing,
again captures it off in a system that's not where your engineers do their work.
the only field that I see that's unified across all systems, which unfortunately doesn't make sense to use, is title, right? Title comes from Microsoft 365 into PSA, into Hudu, into Lifecycle, title. But what if someone is 3 different types of key contacts? How do you fit that in the title, right? And the PSA also doesn't even show that information. The key contact information, they have to go manually look up the contact record in the PSA to see. They don't see it as they're working on a ticket, right? So I feel like it's a huge boat that's been missed by our industry is that it is important to understand who the key contacts are. If a key contact gets offboarded, who's making sure we understand who the replacement key contact is? And how are we flagging for that, right?
Yep.
So I don't know. I'm just venting, I guess, and trying to figure out a solution to a problem. And
I get it. We need to figure out solutions to those kind of problems. And it's an important question. And it's a great point for the 40 people or so who are on this call to start thinking about those kind of things. Like that's important. I don't know that us trying to square peg round hole something like that into, or I feel like when you put it in Lifecycle, it's off on an island where 1/3 of the organization has access to it. And I hate to do that.
That's fair. I completely understand that direction.
But I still want to be able to get it from wherever it lives. And that creates that other problem.
Yeah.
I'm on both sides of that fence, believe me.
Yeah.
Zapier is an interesting conversation. I think Roost is an interesting conversation around some of that. They may be the folks who help start allowing us to glue some of that all together. But
I mean, so let's talk about Hudu though. I mean, what if in Hudu I created a field that was contact type, right? Could you reference that in Hudu as key contacts? Because here's the problem too, right? If I put it in another system, you're not gonna be able to grab it. So then we're not gonna see it in Lifecycle. And my client success manager is the one who needs to see it most often.
So let me lay out how it's built in ConnectWise, and then we'll let Sam talk about whether or not they can reference it in Hudu, because I think ConnectWise does a pretty good job. ConnectWise has account types, and someone can be of multiple account types. So I can be a user, I can be a finance user, and I can be the data breach point of contact. You can be a user, a finance user, and the door access control point of contact, or the security training point of contact, or the human resources or whatever, however many types of contacts you have. And so when we pull that in, we can see all that data. What we don't do today is allow you to say, if you see this particular one in any of those groups, call it a key contact. That's a feature we could add. But ConnectWise at least presents that data to us. Sam, are you guys doing anything around account contact types? And is it a single check field? Is it a multi-type field like that? How do you guys handle it?
That would probably more so be a field that we use as some sort of tag within our fields and asset layouts. If you're bringing it,
it's handled like a tag in ConnectWise, even though they don't call it that. You can grab multiples and stick them on the same line.
Yeah, and in this case, I guess maybe tag was kind of giving ourselves too much of the benefit. It would be a field that would be searchable that you could determine based on your naming standards. But when it comes to bringing it in through the integration, that is something that I would probably have to investigate exactly how we handle and manage that. I was looking right now while you were talking about that, how we handle ConnectWise. Unfortunately, I don't have the integration up right now, so I can't quite look. So unfortunately, I really don't have an answer right now.
I'll just say for ConnectWise partners, it's largely solved. Like it just isn't a struggle for them. It's a struggle for not ConnectWise partners. I think they're the rare example of somebody who handles it well.
I would say in that case, using a field to your best advantage, and then using comprehensive or using favorited, the way to kind of identify it from there. In terms of a sole feature to directly use that kind of highlight, full disclosure, no, we don't really have that right now.
I'm just gonna have to get Autotask to fix their contact groups. It sounds like. Because they were going the
I'm
right.
sorry, you were serious. I thought you were telling jokes.
Well, I'm serious. It just sucks.
Yeah.
Everyone's gone there now. Like
I still
everyone-
haven't gotten them to put purchase date on an asset, and I've been yelling about that for 3 years. So
And you know what sucks too is that you know I'm on all their partner advisory boards, but we've all communicated on Slack in the past, right? And then Kaseya Bottom, they've all moved to Teams, and none of the Datto employees even pay attention to Slack anymore. So like, there's all these MSPs chiming in there. Hey, where's everyone at? No one's responding, and so eventually we'll get moved to Teams, I hope. But all right, that's my answer. Contact groups, and I have to just figure out how to light a fire under Autotask to get that fixed.
I mean, we do have security groups, but unfortunately, that's
be-
the best I can offer.
I wouldn't be surprised if they rolled this contact groups out and you can't even get to it from the API. You know, it's like, you know, so in fact, I don't know if you could maybe put that on your list, Alex, because you guys work with the API. Can you see if you can even see anything about contact groups? I mean,
if you
now,
can
but-
point us to what it looks like on your side and give us some
Sure.
field names and that kind of stuff, we can have one of our smart guys go poke at it and see.
I'll
No,
put in
I
a
cannot.
support ticket.
I am absolutely incapable of answering that question for you, but I know who can.
I'll throw in a support ticket and I'll at least get that side of the ball rolling and to
Yeah, that,
identify what you guys can and can't see.
it'd be
right?
great to come up with some best practices about that and document it, you know, and even with the Hudu side, like if you guys have some Hudu best practices that make life easier in life cycle, like, let's sit down and do some documentation around those things and get them in there. You know, we have things in our documentation as simple as how to create how to manually create an asset in Synchro, because when we onboard all our Synchro partners, none of them knew how to go make a firewall if Synchro hadn't automatically created it. So if we get some of these best practices for users and those kind of things, like, we're happy to help you document them and even stash them in our KVs so that the whole community has access to them. We're here to educate and lift everybody up.
No, yeah, I mean, especially on the Hudu side, we're never against any sort of reason to just have content information out there. And it makes everyone's life easier. And if for a documentation platform to have bad documentation is kind of, you know, a fault that everyone should avoid. So yeah, I mean, I'm always an open book. I mean, especially with Lifecycle. I mean, we always have an open line. Hopefully the whole team knows that. And I mean, it sounds like we also might have a few more things to talk about, because I know people would love to see your reporting tools inside Hudu as a card. And I know that's something that, you know, should be on the docket at some point and talk about. So yeah, it's my email's always open, unfortunately, but also and I know it's for the best.
You ConnectWise guys are pretty down on ConnectWise, but I would say it could be a lot worse. Having used ConnectWise for a long time, 2009 or 2010 till 2020, a decade in ConnectWise, you guys could have it a lot worse. It's a big fat clunky beast, but there's a lot worse out there. I'm not going for a marketing job over there. That is not the marketing slogan. This is why these vendors don't like me.
Sam, I super appreciate you coming to the party today.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad I could be invited, and I hope I've offered something helpful and didn't say too many broadly worded topics or notes.
It's the perfect balance of not too broad, not too specific. Again, you hit the Goldilocks window, so perfect.
I appreciate that. I'm speaking at PAX, and actually almost over a week. So avoiding those nothing sandwiches to a group of people looking for advice. I mean, that's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all the fun out of it. Just run out there and stick your foot in your mouth and figure it out later. That's all.
Like I said, I can talk way too much. I'm sure I have 45 minutes. I could probably say a whole lot of nothing that whole time and maybe throw in some big words. But no, seriously, thank you so much. I do unfortunately have to hop off right at this time. It's been wonderful talking to all of you, and
we've all got places to go, I'm sure. So even if it's just to the corner bar.
I
All right.
also might have to buy the AT-AT that I see behind you because I've been staring at that for this entire time. And I'm realizing I might have to buy a new shelf to hold it. So I appreciate that too.
I did. I had to buy a
It's-
shelf to hold it.
$850.
So, yeah.
Oh, what? Just 800? Yeah, easy.
No.
That's
I got
fine.
it. I bought it last Christmas and it was only 800. Inflation will get you now.
Legos are not for
No
kids
longer in
anymore.
stock.
Yeah.
I gotta mount my lightsabers. I got some other stuff, but
Don't have children and you can afford stuff like
Yeah.
that. That's my life advice to everyone.
Pro tip, Sam, don't mount your lightsaber on a white board, white background, because it's not going to pop off. Make sure it's black so it can reflect whatever light it is. I
And
have that
this-
problem right now. So
And this is how a nerd conversation ends on a Friday. And with that,
Exactly right.
everyone, thank you
I know,
so
I'm
much
like,
for
man,
coming out.
why are we talking about this now when I have to hop off? Unfortunately, I'm renting.
hey,
Um,
my email is open as well, Sam. You can
I
contact
think
me anytime.
we might just have to have our own little fun
Hey,
conversation.
let's go.
Get it done. Get it done.
You know,
All right,
Mark,
guys.
Mark, the problem's real.
Yeah, it is.
Struggles are real.
Yes, I agree.
Should have
I
led with
agree.
this.
Now we know.
Now
Have
we
a good
know.
weekend, everybody. Thank you, Sam.
Take care, everybody.
Have a good night.
They do.